When atoms congregate together into becoming solid objects by sharing their paucity, their deficiency of valence electron volts, they have agreed, when they do this, they have agreed to not steal from each other anymore, but instead steal from everyone else in the universe. And by coming together into a congregation of atoms and molecules composing what we call a solid object, they have increased their collective gravity for sucking energy to themselves from everyone else in the universe. Because it is a selfish act of survival to steal energy from everyone else. And it's the goal, the target, the purpose behind gravity is to steal energy. We always think of it as stealing matter. By pulling matter without matter's consent, if the pulling force is coming from a object of greater gravitational force than the smaller one, then the smaller one has no choice but to be pulled towards the larger object. So that it works the same way with energy. Why should it work any differently with energy than it does with matter? And free energy is nothing but this. It's the act of gravity, of pulling energy now we're focusing on, instead of focusing on matter. And the deficiency that's inherent in non-halogenic elements of the periodic chart, which are not fulfilled. They don't have all the energy shells satisfied, so they pull energy from elsewhere, from outside themselves, toward themselves. And if they agree to congregate into solid objects, then they agree not to steal from each other, but just from everybody else, with increased pulling force now that they have more gravity. But this can be artificially induced in a so-called free energy circuit. You don't need mass or size, although it helps to have, more massive coils, to have more inductance, but capacitance is the opposite. We have increased capacitance with less dielectric thickness, although with greater areas. So it'll appear to be larger when you look at it from a certain perspective. The capacitor will have all this humongous area, but if you look at it edge on, it'll disappear. It'll be so thin. So capacitors look large due to perspective, while inductance always looks large because it's a big coil from any direction you look at it. But just by increasing the third principle of an LRC circuit, the resistance of a load, causes a greater gravitational force to pull energy in from some external source. God knows what. We don't care because we're stealing it. We don't care where we steal it or who we steal it from, just so long as we get more of it. So increasing the number of lamps by a factor of 16 in a 4x4 array, it's incorrect to say they are consuming power, because that's the least important element that they are doing. In a free energy circuit, there's something more important going on, in that they steal with greater effectiveness. Now, they only steal 4 times greater, but because they banded together, they were able to do so. If they hadn't banded together, if we stuck them in a idiotic dumb flashlight circuit, they would consume 16 times more energy, and there'd be no way out of that. But we're not putting them in a flashlight circuit. We're putting them in a free energy circuit so that they have 4 times greater gravitational pull to pull energy into themselves from their environment, and they come out ahead because they learn to congregate. They learn to cooperate under a congregation of themselves and each other, with themselves, to themselves, so that they can get greater gravitational force to pull in energy into themselves. And okay, 4 times greater for 16 more members congregating together. That doesn't sound like free energy, right? It sounds like you've lost something. But try and tell that to the one that's starving, to get 4 times more energy than they would have gotten by themselves had they just floated around as individual lamps, like individual cosmic atomic-sized dust. To be able to get 4 times more energy when you get 15 other buddies like yourself to congregate together into a solid object, I'd say that's pretty good. To get 4 times more than you would have as an individual. That means you all benefit. Bank robbers usually don't go into a bank single-handedly. They'd have to be stupid, right? They usually have a gang. They got somebody waiting outside who's the driver, and they got the planner, and they got somebody covering the door, and, they've got each person doing a different job, but they congregate together to cooperate, to be more effective as a group than as individuals. And the bigger the group, the easier it is to take flack. Nobody likes to be singled out and have stones cast in their directions. It's no fun. So it's really a principle of the universe. It has nothing to do with spirituality, morality, religion, ethics. None of that has absolutely any bearing whatsoever. Science, can be fairly cruel if all we do is study science. And that's the hard fact of the matter, is if we're not a robust, well-rounded individual developed in many different ways, then science is cruel, it kills, it does everything nasty you can imagine. And unfortunately, that's the way the Nazis took science in that direction 60 years ago, 70 years ago. They didn't care about its consequences. They just said, hey, come on, let's do it. Because they understood it. And once they understood it, they got greedy. Or they got greedy, and they, in their attitude of greed, they found the right scientists who felt likewise. Whichever came first. One hand slaps the other on the back, and they all get together because they all have the same objectives. But what I care about is the truth and honesty of the matter, and to stop lying about it. Just because it's uncomfortable to talk about it. Yeah, it has consequences when you start looking at it in a truthful, honest manner. Because now it abridges, it affronts, it offends anybody's sensibility of morality, that we've been brought up to believe in or trust in. None of it matters anymore unless we somehow make it matter. That'll be up to us to figure out how to integrate a godless science, because at its nature it is godless because it doesn't care. Thievery doesn't care who you steal from, just so long as you get it done, just so long as you survive. So it may be just difficult for us to appreciate what free energy amounts to. Hey, it's been hard for me. I'm speaking from my own self, It's been hard for me to admit that it comes down to theft. And I had to go through this several weeks ago, a couple of months ago, with Wikipedia, with Wikimedia, with Wikibooks, with Wikiversity, coming to the conclusion that it's based on theft because I simulated it. And it showed me that that's what a free energy circuit will do if it's in proximity to the electric grid. It will steal from it. And you won't be able to stop it. It'll just happen. But it was hard for me to accept it. Well, now looking at it from the point of view of valence electron volts, there's no question anymore. Now I've got from two different perspectives. Theft is the name of the game when it comes to free energy. There's no way around it. And it's easy to ignore what happened 100 years ago with Sierra Lemon when he was arrested for stealing energy from the grid, when he stepped onto federal territory of Washington, D.C., after giving his demonstration with his brother in Denver. On non-federal territory, apparently the jurisdiction didn't apply to him. But because the grid apparently is like the railroads. It's a federal authority. I didn't know this, but apparently that's the case because he wasn't arrested outside of Washington, D.C. The minute he stepped onto federal territory, he was arrested. So it shows that the grid has specific jurisdiction. It's federal territory. Anyway, he was arrested. He was charged with theft. And it's so easy to ignore that because it's 100 years later. But that's a third instance, along with valence electron volts, the paucity of such within non-halogenic elements of the periodic chart, and the simulations I've done that I used to be posted on my Wikiversity text, but have been removed because they don't like to listen to me talk about free energy. They can't stand it, and a lot of people can't. But I can see why. But I have to face it because I promote it, so I have to accept it. As grueling harsh as it may be, I have to accept the truth of the matter of what it constitutes is outright theft. And also to admit that it's already been happening under our noses when we study the behavior of gravity. It's no different. If the behavior is no different, then how can we exclude one from the other and say they're unrelated to each other? The behavior is exactly the same. Non-halogenic atoms coming together to share their poverty of valence electron volts, and so they elect not to steal from each other anymore because now they are congregated. They're together. So it's only a foreigner who's not part of the group, not part of that solid mass that has come together, that gets its energy stolen from it. Once it comes under the domain of proximity, I guess, it's hard to think of it as a separate object. You know, it's like, well, if you live in somebody's home long enough, if you're a newcomer, at what point are you considered family? You know, it's only the distance we imagine in our minds that we put between each other that causes theft to be required in the first place. So the morality, if you want to call it that, points to unity, that we all cooperate and figure out how to help each other instead of thinking that we've got to be antagonistic towards each other, because then we'll have no choice but to steal. So it's the bottom line of science when you lack social unity is to steal. That's a kind of science to sociology. Is the science of theft, is the science of survival. But if you learn to cooperate, then you don't steal. You share. You share what you have so that nobody goes without, and everybody has something.